the next thing I want to talk about is a power regional prep. So there's a number of things about this before, during, and after, and I do think of them three different ways. So when you're getting ready to go to these events are very different than a regular regional. You know that if you've been to them before. The first thing being they're in an arena, and then the second thing being, you know, what happens at them. They are late in the year. They're well attended for a number of reasons. One, a lot of people feel like, you know, they want to go to the end and get a higher score. So, and as the season goes along, they get a higher score. Sometimes when you figure out what your score is there, would have been better if you did your first regional and just let the points add on every week. So the way it works is when you go to a regional early in the year, every week after that there's regionals, 1.5 points is added to that score that you achieved when you went to a regional. Some people have gone to a regional and then 2 or 3 weeks later, 4 weeks later, go to a power regional and then they get a score that's lower than the one where they would have gotten if they just let the 1.5 points add and go on from there. It is not a given that you're going to get 1.5 or 2 points a week just by showing up at a show. In fact, when you go to some of these power regional events, it's very likely that your score might not go up very much because of a number of factors. The biggest one being the number of people in your class you might be competing with might be expanded so much. The contest dynamics might be such that the top number is at a certain point and the bottom is at a certain point, and people have to fit in between. We don't look at who's going there and say, well, their score should have gone up to a certain point, so therefore they should be at an X. We look at that contest. The contest dynamics dictate what's going to on in many cases. The facility you're in, the number of people in your class, and your performance. And I always say this to people, you know, yes, you think your color guard got a lot better, but your competitors may have gotten a lot better as well. In many cases, maybe more than you. Not many, in some cases. But in many cases, you might be the one that exceeds somebody else's growth. Some people start at a certain point and then they grow to a greater point. That growth is not always guaranteed just by X number of weeks during the competitive season. So there's a number of things that are different about these shows. And the things that you have to think about that, you know, going to this type of a show might be a little bit different than a regular regional. Where's the hotel you're staying at? Look at the location of your hotel. What route am I going to take? I'm in a bus. Side streets. Is there construction along the way? Are we going from the hotel to the show site, or are we going to rehearsal first? And what route are we going to take going back? Now, in many cases, the bus company may look into some of those things, but I really think it's important that you look into those things. Look where your rehearsal is and pull it up on Google Maps and it says it's 28 miles away and you should be there in 35 minutes. Well, that's fine, assuming that there's not a breakdown or an accident or a detour of some sort. So plan accordingly. Those are the types of things that you have to plan well in advance. Restaurants, parking at the stadium, at the event, at the arena where the show is. Where's the bus lot and how much time will it take you to get inside? Is your equipment in a truck that goes to one location and you're going to park somewhere else, but where does the guard check in versus where the props check in? And here's something a lot of people don't think about. When you get into an arena event, it's entirely likely that guard check-in is at a different place than where the prop unloading and storage is. You have to make sure that the people that are working for you that are going to go to that school have their wristbands ahead of time. They're not going to be allowed into the arena. You know, they can unload your stuff in the lot somewhere, but they're not going to get in without wristbands. When you get to there and you're going to check in the guard, you know, well, how far away is it that you have to walk to get these people their wristbands to do that? All things that a good director will think about ahead of time and say, okay, how do I plan for this to happen? The other thing is, here's another one. Do you have parents that are traveling with you on the bus that are going to have to buy tickets? Well, if you go to guard check-in, how far are they going to have to walk to go around to get in? So those are the little things that over the years, many of us have learned to just, you know, to address ahead of time and be prepared for. Those are the before things. Think of all those things that could get in your way that could prevent it from being a really smooth process, okay? Now let's talk about during, okay? So when you get to the arena, think about what time you're going to get there. And what are you going to do when you get there? You're going to do a sound check, so you need to look at the schedule. Sound checks only happen at breaks. Well, if you're on at 1:20 in the afternoon and you have a choice of either the break is from 12 to 1, you say, okay, well, good, I might be able to be there. Well, that may mean that your guard can't be in the arena when you do that check, okay? Well, now you might have to say, I'm going to have to do the sound check without the guard. Do I go and do it at 7 in the morning before rehearsal? And here's something else to think about. How are you getting there to do that sound check? If you're on the bus, then you need to arrive in such a time that you can get in there and do that sound check, because you might have one break or one meal to get in there and do that sound check. You don't get to do sound checks in between guards. And please don't assume just because your music was uploaded that you know what it's going to sound like and that it works. It's important that you do a sound check with your primary and your secondary source of music, okay? Physically go look at the warm-up space, all right? You can look online and see what the pictures are, but you know as well as I do what it looks like in person is different. Go there, look at it, and say, how big is it? What can I do in here? Is it a shared space? Do I have double time all to myself? If it's not, if it is a shared space, can I use music? Because you might do your warm-up a certain way, but you might have to change that. You can read a lot of that stuff in your packet, but it does make a difference when you're physically looking at that warm-up space and saying, okay, all right, here's what I think we can do when we get in here. Now you can communicate that ahead of time, and you know before you walk in. When you get in there, there's nothing more frustrating to think that you have a place to play music, and you find out that there's only a single curtain there and you can't play music because you're in a shared space. And you think you can use music the whole time, and if it's a shared space where you've got an A and B warm-up, you can only use music on the second half of the time. So that stuff will be in the package, but being able to just go through the process, walking through the building and knowing what you're headed towards means that you'll be able to sit down with the guard and say, okay, here's what we're going to do when we get to warm up, and they'll understand, and they'll buy into it a little bit easier if they're prepared for it before you get there. Prop unloading and storage, again, where's that going to be? How much can get into the building? It's going to be stored there. What do we have to do? Do we go right back outside, have to load everything back up? In almost every arena, in fact, I don't know that there is one that has floor folding inside. But, something else you got to think about too. Okay, kids, we got to get all the props broken down. The parents are here to help, but you got to get the floor done. We got to get back on the bus. Do you have rehearsal later or the next day? How are you folding that floor, and where is it going to go? Are you going to take all of your props with you to rehearsal? Those are the types of things when you come off the floor. Unit flow is important too, because if you just walk through from where check-in is to where the guard area is, if there's an assigned guard area, to where all the warm-up space is, to where the ready space is, to where the entrance is under the floor, where you're going to go off and follow the flow back right out to the bus. I know it seems a little bit, crazy, but I'm telling you, the number of times that I've done that, and then you are prepared for something that you weren't really prepared for before because you just walked it and went, okay, I get it now. I need a little bit more time here, or we should dress a little bit sooner if we want to talk before we go into warm-up, or there really is no place to talk before warm-up. So we're going to get dressed and talk in private before we start going through the warm-up process. Maybe it's not as quiet. You can't do your kumbaya moment that you like to do before the kids go onto the floor because you're, going to be in a hallway. You can't sing, those types of things. All the things that I think are important for you to do when you get to a show. Think about those before you get there. And in some cases, talk to the kids about them ahead of time, and that just, it'll help prepare through the process from there, okay? Afterwards, here's some things I want you to think about. Are you going to let your kids stay and watch? Do your bus drivers have schedules that they have to adhere to? They can't be there for a certain amount of time. Are you going to take those kids to eat? Or are you going to tell them to eat there at the show? Does that mean they're loading on the bus and they're going somewhere else, but you want to come back and watch World Class if you're an A-Guard? So those are the things that you have to think about ahead of time, because on Sunday you might be at rehearsal and you might say, well, I'm going to let them watch after finals. But in some cases, you've got a long time. So what does your Saturday actually look like? Are we rehearsing? Are we eating? Or are we watching? Number of things to think about. Critique logistics. Carl's going to talk to you about critiques, but here's what I want you to think about. What time is your critique? And how are you getting there? So if your critique is 2 hours after you go on and the group is going to go eat, if you have to be with the group, how are you getting back to critique? Do you have a ride back? Is the bus taking you back? Do you think you're going to be back in time before, you know, the critique starts for the kids to watch. You're going to go eat and then be able to come back. Or have you made arrangements to get rides when they go back to the hotel? Maybe your critique, if you're on open guard or war guard, is after, you know, after prelims. So the bus is going to leave and the kids are going to go back to the hotel, or maybe they're going to go eat at that point and they'll stop at a store, one of those things. How are you going to get back to the hotel? Are you going to Uber it? Do you have a car? You're going to figure all that out. That's the after stuff that I think about all the time. Is, you know, I don't want to be worried about those things after the fact. I want to think about them ahead of time and say, see if I can make some plans and maybe make that work a little bit better for me, you know, at the end. So you can plan the day out for the kids, but in many cases, you're the director, you're with those kids. You don't have an option to stay there, but you signed up for critique. So who's going to go to critique on your behalf if your color guard has to go somewhere else? Do we allow flexibility in the critique time schedule? Yeah, typically if somebody doesn't show up for critique, if they get there by the end, we'll try and get them worked in. So let's just say your critique time was, you know, at 7:45 at night and you weren't there. We would, is anybody in the hallway ready? We'd take the next person in. If you came in an hour late, we would let you get in. But there's no guarantee of that. We're going to stick to the original schedule. And if everybody's there, we will do the best that we can, but we can't make the judges stay later beyond that time. We have pretty strict guidelines with how many hours that they can work, how much time they have to be off before they come back the next day. And we can't have them waiting around for people that aren't there, unless we know otherwise ahead of time. If you get a time assigned to you and you don't tell us anything, you know, we're not we don't have to make any, you know, concessions for you. We'll do the best that we can, but you have to make sure that you're on top of what your responsibilities are as well. So there's a few things that I just wanted to share with you. You can either plop a schedule into the question into this webinar, and I'll get to it after Carl finishes his stuff, or you can send me an email at dale@wgi.org. Geez, I'm sorry. It's phone calls and webinars constantly, as Carl knows. So yeah. I am going to change presenter real quick.
Hey, Dale, give me a second. I've got two things for you. Can we talk just for
quick? Sure. Yeah,
so I'm going to work backwards. You know, one of the big new things this year that's been an issue, especially at the earlier regionals, and I want to make sure that people have this down at the Power Regional, is if they're playing on their device and the device goes to sleep and then the sound stops. Can you walk us through that?
It happened. It's happened twice this year. So what we found is that when you store your sound file, if you play it off of a device, if it's in your Google Docs or in a folder in your Google Docs, if you're playing it from there and your phone is not set to never go to sleep, when your phone goes to sleep, it will then disconnect from the dongle that it was plugged into, and the sound will then start coming out of the phone. So it happened to us twice this year at shows, and then it took us a long time to figure out what the common denominator was, but Matt Becker from Competition Suite was able to dig down and do some research on it. And in both cases, the staff member, I happened to be at one of the shows, he literally put his hands up in the air like, I didn't do anything. And we found out the same thing happened at the other one, but it was partway through their show where their phone was set to sleep at 5 minutes. So as the phone went to go to sleep, it disconnected. Now, normally, you know, if you're just listening to music in iTunes or whatever, your phone will shut up and go to sleep. You're still listening to music. In this case, because it was plugged in through the dongle and where the file came from, that created that issue and that made the phone go to sleep. So we always tell people, on top of making sure that you're, you know, in airplane mode, so that you don't get a text message or your phone doesn't start ringing partway through. And some of you may be chuckling, but that has happened. Some of us have heard that actually live.
It's awful.
But in this case, and you just got to make sure that your phone is set to never go to sleep. So, and you find that in your settings. I'm sure you all can find that. So, yeah, there's one, Carl.
Thank you. And you're so good at explaining complex information. I really admire that, because I'm going to read to people like they're a 7-year-old in here in a minute. Hey, I started projecting myself into the instructor mind. You know, I kind of come by that naturally. And I started panicking about my 7 and 8 week review that happens at the very end of the season with no other regionals left. If I'm one of those people that suspect that maybe I could be reclassified or I'm in the 50-50 zone, can I be proactive and send you a video before I go to my week 7 and 8 regional?
You can. We get them in January from a lot of people, and people will say, hey, we're not really sure, but we think that maybe. And we will look at videos for people. And that doesn't mean that if we see it and go, oh, they're open class, watch out. We will tell them, we had a number of people look at this, and the general consensus is we think you belong in the open class or the A class. We get a few of those, a handful, half a dozen in January, typically, when people are looking at their show. We do occasionally get them during the year when people are only having one regional and it's in the second half of the season. And they're looking at it that way and saying, if I'm only going to have one regional, do I want that to be in an A-class show and then I get reclassified and I don't get on open sheets at all? So we've had people come to us and say, would you look at us, since we're only doing one regional in week 6 or week 7 or week 8, and tell us now, and if you think we should go, the general consensus is we should be an open, we're going to go there now and get an open class sheets before, we start competing. So that does happen a lot more than you would think. And contrary to popular belief, we don't, look at your show and say, there's another one, move them on up. That's not how it works. If people are proactive and come to us, we just give them feedback.
Yeah. And if I'm not reclassified, does that mean that I'm not reviewed then? Or does it mean I still have to go through the review if I'm in the top 3 of my last regional, my week 7 or 8?
Yeah, you do. Even just like if you do back-to-back regionals or you do 3 regionals in a year, you have to submit every single time. In this case, if you are proactive and send it in before the season, you still have to send it in if you finish in the top 3 of a regional, yes. And the reason that we do that is we tell people that your shows are going to change. We know the effort that you're going to put into it, not only to advance your program, but how good your kids are going to get as well. Things are going to look differently in week 1, week 3, week 5, week 7. And if we look at your show at the end of January and say, no, we think you're an A guard, but you go to a regional in week 5 or week 6, you can look completely different. And, and we tell people ahead of time, if you want us to look at the tape, here's the information we'll give you, and understand that you may be requested to be reviewed again later, and it is possible that you could be reclassified.